Hello and welcome to The Federal. Today we are talking to Ms. Ellora Puri. She is a member of Department of Political Science at the Jammu University. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Puri.
Thank you so much for having me over.
Ma'am, my first question to you is, from two seats in 1984 elections, in 30 years, BJP became the single largest party with full majority in Lok Sabha in 2014. So BJP has managed to become the center of political power and replace Congress. How
Yeah.
big a development is this for a non-Congress party?
Well, of course, this is something very important which has happened to the Indian political system per se. Given that we had once upon a time one-party dominant system, which was basically the Congress system for such a long time, starting from 1952 onwards till 1967. So one assumed for a very long time that we wouldn't have anything to replace Congress. But of course, from 1991 onwards, what we did see was 92 onwards. What we did see was coalition government coming to power, regionalization of political parties happening, regionalization of Indian politics happening, and for a very long time, then again, the assumption was that now we've left the one-party dominant era and we've moved to a multi-party party system, right? So 2014 was in a way, something that many people thought it was a white swan movement, right? It was something which, black swan movement. It was something that was once, BJP just, got in power because of fluke, essentially. And many people didn't actually think of the fact that it might come back to power in 2019 and with a much, much more larger number in the parliament. So it is an important shift which has happened in the Indian political system. And in fact, if you were to, look at it, it's very unprecedented. And at this point in time, given the fact that you do not really have any other party which could actually come as a response to BJP and form another alternative power center, this, seems to be something which is going to be there for quite some time. Let's see what happens in these elections. But I really don't know what does it foretell about our political system per se, because of course what you do need is, when you're talking about a democratic polity, what you do need is alternation of power, right? But given the kind of majority that the party is enjoying at the moment, and if it comes back with a similar kind of majority, and they're aiming for 400 par, if they come back with a similar kind of majority, that would be something which we might need to think about, how our democracy is functioning. Is it functioning the manner in which it is supposed to be functioning? At least in terms of how we understand democracy definitionally. So I don't know whether that answers your question there, in terms of how it has. Okay. Yeah.
In the last 44 years of its inception, BJP has remained in power for 16 years. And we have seen two different prime ministers. First, it was Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee and now Prime Minister Modi. What is the difference between the two personalities?
The difference is very evident, actually, if you want to look at it. But I think, given the fact that Mr. Vajpayee was emerging out of a certain kind of historical milieu, which was very Nehruvian, essentially. If you recall, he becomes the MP during Nehru's time. And he's actually given a lot of space by Nehru himself, who calls him the next prime minister. That basically shaped his personality, that shaped his political persona, in terms of how he interacted with the rest of political contemporaries within his context, and which was basically contemporaries. When I'm talking about rest of the political contemporaries, I'm talking about rest of the political contemporaries in other parties, right? So there was a sense of one could call it political camaraderie between him and the rest, the opposition, if you were to see it. And you could see that there was respect, mutual respect between the parliamentarians of his party and the other party. And I think that was courtesy the fact that he was a leader at that point in time, right? While when you look at Mr. Modi, there seems to be more of a, he seems to be much more in your face at a certain level. Also, very, very, his personality per se, because it's one based on a very populist, persona per se, and also, this idea of him being a powerful minister. Prime Minister, this idea of him being a masculinistic Prime Minister, this idea of him being a macho Prime Minister, this idea of him being somebody, who has all the power essentially, which is invested in the Parliament as well as the government per se. It's somewhat confrontationalist, his personality per se. It is also, a very centralized kind of system that he's running. So the power seems to be in his hands. While when you were to look at Vajpayee, it seemed to be a more open to opinions kind of, government that you were looking at. So the manner in which, the decisions were taken under Vajpayee's government seemed to be more open to ideas from various spaces, political spaces, whether it was from within his own party or outside his party, right? So you had a person like Jaswant Singh in the party. You also had, Vajpayee actually, communicating with party leaders elsewhere in, when you're talking about other party leaders, opposition party leaders, talking with them, having conversations with them, getting inputs from them, right? When you're looking at the manner in which the government is run by Modi, it seems as if most of the decisions are taken in that central high command, which is run by him as well as Mr. Shah at this point in time. And many decisions we know for a fact, something like demonetization or something like, abrogation of Article 370. Many of these decisions were not shared with the rest of the cabinet, forget other political leaders outside the government per se. So that seems to be a very different way of functioning. Both of them function very differently. The personalities are very different. And of course, perhaps it is got something to do with the fact that both of them came from a very different political milieu. So Vajpayee actually became a political personality during the Nehruvian era, while Modi basically is coming, when he comes 2002, when he comes to power, he's coming from RSS background. He really hasn't had that kind of political experience of the parliament per se, in which you would, the parliament is meant to be a discussion forum, right? So Vajpayee was coming from that milieu per se. So that I think would be the difference between the two of them.
Now, BJP has completed some of its most controversial promises, like removal of Article 370, construction of Ram Temple, and now implementation of CAA. So now PM has talked about more big decisions in this third term if BJP comes to power. What are those big decisions according to you?
So difficult to speculate. And if one was to speculate on that, one comes up with all kinds of dire forecasts, which one doesn't want to go into. But the kind of forecasts that are... sorry?
So, no, I meant PM has talked about one nation, one poll.
Yeah. So those kind of things we've heard of, right? So more essentially, when you're looking at it, more centralization of power, it seems. So when we're talking about one nation, one elections, that is centralization, right? That is centralization right away that you're looking at, right? There is this understanding that there might be some bit of tinkering with the constitution at a certain level, and there were certain statements which were made by the BJP leaders saying that we'll change the constitution, right? And I would hesitate to basically speculate on whether they would want to write in the constitution that we want to become a Hindu Rashtra or something like that. I would hesitate to say that, but perhaps they might, given what we've been hearing and the kind of feelers that one has been getting from spaces like RSS, etc., there might be some discussion on how to modify the 42nd Amendment, for example. The 42nd Amendment, which included the socialist and secular the terms in the preamble. So there might be a discussion on that. I've heard about it. We don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but it seems to be something which is integral to BJP's politics because, of course, secular is a term which they do not really like. We know that, and of course, socialists, they might, they might not have problems with that, but there might be something to do with it. Might be something to do with the 42nd Amendment, and of course, also, Universal Civil Code. This is something that discussion has been happening for a very long time. They've been postponing it. And it's very interesting. Why have they postponed Uniform Civil Code and they have not postponed the other things, right? Because one of the demands for Uniform Civil Code has actually come from the feminist movement itself, right? So if they have to cater to that demand, then they'll have to take into consideration what the feminists are talking about, while they'll have to also go against their own certain kind of conservative, ideas which are prevalent in BJP when it comes to gender relations. So perhaps that's the reason why they have been waiting for them to get the majority that they would need from all kinds of backgrounds to change the code and make this universal civil code. But all this is for speculation. Let's see what happens if they get that kind of a majority. Yeah.
My last question to you is: Bofo scandal and Ram Janambhoomi movement played an important role in the decline of Congress and rise of BJP in Indian politics. Corruption and religion continue to play an important role in politics. So, what has changed in these last 35 years?
Wow. Religion seems to have become a much more focal point in terms of how we determine our national identity. Which is very interesting because, of course, we know when, during the independence movement, there was this huge conflict between religious nationalism and secular nationalism. And we thought that secular nationalism has won over religious nationalism, right? The partition definitely happened, but we always associated religious nationalism with the conservative elements, or so-called backward elements or regressive elements, which were more of the Muslim League variety, and we did not associate that with Indian nationalism per se. So what has happened is, over the last 35 years or 40 years, what you do see is that nationalism has come to be defined, redefined, modified, remodified by giving it this religious tinge, and that is something which has, which has become very, very evident in the last 10 years, if you were to see it. How we define ourselves, how we think of ourselves as Indians, how we look at what are Indian cultural traditions, how we see the naming and the renaming of various cities and various monuments, etc., etc. All that is happening in terms of how religion is become so integral to our understanding of what Indians are, right? So I would actually say it's no more a particular party agenda in terms of religion. Now, if you were to actually go and talk about politics anywhere across the country, religion seems to have percolated down to each and every sphere in that sense, right? So I don't think you would be able to separate the two of them for a very long time, right? Not for a very long time, in a long time, right? I don't think you'll be able to separate them in a very, very long time. In terms of corruption is something, I've always felt that, there's no society which is not corrupt, right? There's no entity which is not corrupt. Human beings are, people who are susceptible to corruption in that sense, right? So you'll see corruption almost anywhere and everywhere, whether you go to US, whether you go to UK, whether you come to India, you have neighboring countries. So corruption is going to continue as a phenomenon, whether it's political phenomena or otherwise. But of course, what you need is, this is something, human beings are fallible, and this is something which is a political theory argument essentially, that because human beings are fallible, you need good institutions. And what has happened in the last few years is that the institutions have been compromised, right? Institutions which could have kept in check corruption per se, they have been compromised, and we've seen that in various fashions. And of course, the last one being this discussion which has been happening around the question of electoral bonds. But the fact that institutions aren't functioning would ensure that corruption would continue. So what we need to do is make our politics more immune to this, via giving more power to institutions and making sure that they're not compromised in the fashion that they have been compromised. So I think both of them are going to continue. Essentially, the role of religion and corruption in our politics is going to continue. Essentially.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Ms. Puri. It was lovely talking to you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.